Okay, so for today's video, I'm going to show you how to take your basic skirt sloper and turn it into a 6-gored skirt. So that means there are going to be 6 panels making up this skirt. There will be a center front panel, 2 side front panels, a center back panel, which will cut on the fold, and 2 side back panels. So in order to get into this, once you actually get your production pattern done, you will be putting a side zipper in. So to start with, I've traced off my front skirt sloper, and as you can see, I have got my dart in here in green, and my center line, that my grain line that goes from the base of the dart down to the base of the skirt. Now for this actual skirt pattern, I want my panels, the 3 panels that are going to be across the front, to be equal in width. So first thing you must do is you must take and you must measure on your hip line. So this is your low hip line. So go to your side seam. Remember, there's no seam allowances on this sloper. And measure over from the side seam to the center front. Now this comes out at 10.5. So in order for me to determine how to get this so that I've got a third and a third, I'm going to take that 10.5. I'm going to multiply it by 2 to get the full width of my skirt. So that is giving me 21. So now I'm going to divide that by 3. So that means each of my panels have to be 7 inches wide. Now, because the front one is cut on a fold, it's going to measure from center front to the first where the cut line is on this pattern. It's going to actually measure 3.5. So it's only half of that 7 inches. So from the side to my line will be 7 inches, but from that parallel line to the center front to my actual center front is only going to be half the distance. The other half is going to be made up on the other when I cut this on the fold. So luckily my measurements came out pretty accurately. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually measuring over. Now my line, so my dart right now is coming in at the 6.5 inch line. So I'm going to have to move this over to 7. I'm just going to quickly switch to a different colored marker so that it's more obvious. So I'm going to bring this over to the 7 inch line. So what I want to do now, I'm going to get a longer ruler, is I want to draw a line, make sure that it's squared up on your hip line and it's parallel to the center front line. So that's where a clear ruler comes in nice and handy. So now I'm going to take, and I'm actually going to draw it from right from the bottom of my pattern right up to the top. I just want to extend it. If you look at this, the line that I actually have on my sloper, it would intersect right through. It comes up from the bottom and it intersects through the middle of the dart. Okay, so I've just drawn a line now parallel over, but in order to make my panels even. So I've now moved this over. Now the problem you can see is my dart is now out of the picture. So what I want to do as well is I want to take, and I'm going to take the base of my dart. So make sure everything is square. So there's the base of my dart, my original dart right here. So I'm now going to make my new base coming out over here. So this is the base of my new dart. Now my dart opening is 1 inch. So I'm going to draw the legs of my new dart at 1 inch on either side of my halfway mark. Make sure I'm on the center of that. Okay, so you can see here I've got the legs of my dart. There's my center of my dart. So I've got 1/2 inch over on either side. So now I'm just going to, actually I'm just going to draw this in pencil because we aren't going to actually keep this dart. But I'm going to draw it in pencil. So let's getting an awful lot of lines here. Okay, just freehanding this. Okay, so if I was actually sewing this skirt up, this would be my new dart positioning here. But because we're actually turning this into 3 panels, this side of my dart is actually the new cutting line for the center panel, because I'm going to be cutting this pattern and dissecting it into 2 more pieces. So I'm just going to take my curved ruler, just find a nice area here where it curves up from the top down to, see how I've blended it in to my cut line. So now this is now 1 piece. Okay, so this is my center panel. It's cut on the fold. I'm going to actually cut this out of here, so I'm going to actually have 2 pieces. So now my other piece, we're going to take the other leg of the dart and we're going to just draw, make sure we get this drawn in here. We're going to draw in. So you can see what, look at the blue line. This is this area here. We're not even using that. So this is a seam going to be a stitching line. This is going to be a stitching line. Now, when I get this all done, I'm actually going to true this area up here so that it doesn't peak up, or that they at least line up and everything matches. But we'll leave that till after we actually separate these 2 pieces. So the one thing I do want to add to this pattern is I want to add some flare. So I don't want just a straight, I could just take and I could cut this pattern up, cut along this pink line here, cut up to here, cut along the other side on the blue line here, and that will be, this will be 1 piece, which I would cut 2. This one would be cut on the fold. So I could just have this and have a straight skirt with 3 panels across the front and 3 panels across the back. But I don't really want that look. I want to have a little bit more movement in this. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to take, I've got a piece of tracing paper here so I can see what I'm actually tracing. I'm going to start with pencil just because I can get it. Now I've got my tracing paper on the fold line. You want to make sure that it stays on the fold line. So you see how I'm tracing out this center front piece. Anywhere that I get where I can actually draw it with a ruler, I'm going to draw out. So now this is cut on the fold. So this is my center front piece. I like to put center front on here just so that I know. Sometimes I even just kind of make sure I've got a little mark there. So I want to add a little bit of flair to this. So I'm making a bit of a note where the bottom of that dart actually would have been. So I'd like to add about, I'd like to add about 1 inch of flare to each seam, okay? So I'm going to take, and you'll remember this if you watch the A-line pattern, I'm going to take and I want to add my seam here. I'm going to draw out, so I've got 1 inch across the bottom, okay? Now this is, so this is my new stitching line here. So when I'm going to cut this out, I'm going to add, so my flare is going to start, it starts, there's, if you look at this, you can see it's barely nothing, and then it just comes out into 1 inch down to the bottom. So that is the centerpiece, okay? So now I want to take, and I can actually take this piece now, I can put my seam allowances on it and my hem allowance on it, and I've got this piece all ready to be cut. So I'm going to be cutting 1 on fold, okay? So that's the center piece. So now I'm going to take another piece of tracing paper. I want to take and I want to actually add some more flare to the other two seams, okay? So I'm going to take, and I'm going to trace this out. Now I still haven't trued this up, which is something I would do once I got them all cut out. I'm going to make a note here. There's where my dart ended. I'm going to trace out my seam, side seam here, straight on the straight line, across the bottom, and up the side seam as well, okay? So I'm just going to, because this line is a little bit curved, I'm just going to curve that. Okay, you may want to take and make a note of where your hip line is. Okay, so I want to add 1 inch of flare at the bottom of this seam as well. So I'm going to just bring this over. There's my 1 inch, taking it from the base of that dart, and I'm going to bring it down. Okay, now I like to kind of take my ruler and sort of fit it in my corner. I didn't do that on the front, but I would have done it on the front, and make sure that I've got a nice squared edge here. Okay, so there's the inside seam, the new one. So we're not going to use this here. This is our new stitching line. So now I want to add the same at the sides here. So I'm going to take, and I'm going to bring this roughly about the same spot, and I'm just going to draw this out so I'm coming up at 1 inch here at the side. Now remember, when you have your side seam, you're actually going to bring this up a little bit, so by about 1/4 of an inch. So just measure out, make sure that that's coming out at 1/4, and then just blend it just gently back in. Might need a bit of a curve ruler. So this, as you can see, let's draw around this. This is my new side panel. So I've added some flare to both sides. Little rough here because I'm just at the base of the camera here. Make sure that you true your seam up. Now's when I could actually take this seam and kind of line these all up. Now I should have actually taken and marked off my hip line, so I would have another mark to go by here, because I would be notching my hip line. So I'm just going to bring these two up, make sure that they line up, and I can already see that they aren't lining up, okay? So now's when you might want to take a curve, and maybe I'm going to add a little bit to that front, take a little bit off of that back seam, okay? So I'm going to take a little down here. Let me draw that little bit in pink. I'm going to take a little bit down there, but I'm going to bring this one up just a little bit to get them to match up, okay? So now this can be a notch when you're all done. Like I say, always a good idea to mark where your hip line is on both areas. So now I've got to make sure that I have my grain line, and you remember that this line here was a straight parallel line to the front, so I can actually, in order to get my new grain line, I can line it up along the edge there, take my ruler. So now I know there's the grain line. I'm going to cut 2 of these. So now I've got a flare. So I've got a flare on either side of this piece. I've got a flare on the center front side of this piece here. This is my new, here's squaring off that corner. This line is actually, these lines are going to be fairly straight. You don't want to have a curve at all when you're sewing your gores together. You want to make sure that you have a nice straight seam, so you're not going to bow out, that everything is going to lay nice and flat once it's all sewn and pressed. Okay, so you can see this is my new center front piece. Pull that back. There's my side. Okay, so you can see how I've added, I've got 2 inches coming here. I've actually got 1 inch coming on this side, but the other inch is coming from the other side seam. Okay. So that is doing a 6 gored skirt with a flare.